Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thanks so much for that. Beautiful. Friends, I'm happy to be here with you tonight, and I'm so grateful you came out, and I believe in the value of human life. I believe in the brilliance of your minds. I believe in the depth of every human heart, and I'm excited to learn with you all tonight about this topic of sexuality. This is an important topic, as we heard. It's a topic that's been ignored, it's been silenced, and I'm glad that we're breaking that, and we're going to have a chat about it tonight. I'm going to share 5 simple points, and I'm mostly excited about your questions. So I want to invite you to think carefully and to think critically about what I say, and to bring questions that you have in your heart without any intimidation or fear or shame. Let's have an open and honest conversation with one another. So, here's my first point. This talk actually is called Good Sex, Making Love with Our Bodies. Good sex, making love with our bodies. So first, we need to talk about sex if we care about Christian imagination and human flourishing. I'm passionate about Christian imagination and human flourishing. If you ask, Andrew, what do you care about most? It's Christian imagination and human flourishing. How should we understand our faith? And how should it inspire our lives in the real world? What does it mean to be fully human and deeply alive? Sex is central to these questions. None of us would exist without sex, right? And many of us are obsessed with sex, even if we don't say that in a place like this. And of course, sex refers to a massive spectrum of feelings, desires, ideas, words, images, and acts. But one thing is certain, we can't ignore or silence sex if we care about our faith and our flourishing. Sex is too important, it's too central to the human condition to pretend like it's not something we should be talking about. Now, sex and pornography are two very different things, and this is not a talk about pornography. But I want you to look at these porn statistics real quick. They show us how interested humans are in sexual images and videos. This is data from 2018. Porn is a $97 billion business each year. $97 billion. Porn sites get more traffic each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. 35% of all internet downloads are porn-related. In 2018, people watched 5.17 billion hours of porn. 5.17 billion hours of porn. That amounts to nearly 230 million days, or 637,000 years of non-stop porn, just in 2018. The website Fight the New Drug calculates that 630,000 hours of pornographic content is consumed every hour. So when you combine all of us who are looking into our phones and our laptops and our whatever, 630,000 hours of porn is being watched for every hour in our world. Pornhub, which is the largest porn site in the world, estimates that there was 283 pornographic images uploaded onto their website for every person on Earth last year. So for every one of you, there was 283 pornographic images uploaded just to their website just last year. So humans are obsessed with sex. And you might say that Ethiopia is different. But according to Pornhub, again, Pornhub is the largest porn website in the world, Ethiopia had the highest increase of mobile porn consumption in 2015. Ethiopian consumption increased 204%. And there are other studies that have shown that there is a huge use of pornography in Ethiopia. So humans are obsessed with sex. And if we care about human flourishing and the Christian imagination, we need to be talking about it. If churches aren't talking about sex, we are failing. We need to talk about it often, honestly, and thoughtfully. And that's what I'm going to try to do with the rest of my time here. And I'm going to ask a couple simple questions. Is sex good or bad? Is sex good or bad? The Bible teaches that God is the creator of our bodies and our sexuality. Our bodies and sex are good gifts from God, not the result of sin. They are God's ideas, not human or worldly inventions. I wanted to ask you to just put your hands together and feel your body and be reminded that we believe God created that. What you feel, physical matter of your body, is God's creation. It's something sacred that God loves. Paul calls our bodies temples of the Holy Spirit and members of Christ. This is extraordinary. As you know, the temple was the holiest place in the world for the Israelites. And Paul says, if you want to know what the real temple is, it's your body. Paul encourages husbands and wives. So he says that in chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians, and then a chapter later, he encourages husbands and wives to have frequent sex with one another. In fact, he challenges them not to withhold sex from one another unless they make a mutual agreement for a short time. Paul says, don't stop for too long. He even says the husband does not have authority over his own body, but he yields it to his wife. Now, this would have been a revolutionary, countercultural idea in ancient patriarchal culture, that the wife also has a claim to her husband's body, not just the husband dominating the wife's body. Paul rejected patriarchal culture that said men own their wives' body. No, the body is something to share, and the wife shares that as well. The book of Proverbs encourages husbands and wives to be intoxicated or drunk with one another's bodies. This is Proverbs chapter 5, verse 19. Before there was Beyonce, Proverbs was drunk in love. The Song of Songs is an erotic love poem. The woman invites, quote, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Take me away with you, let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers. Again, we get a sense of the intoxication and urgency and deep intimacy of this woman's passion. And the husband responds back, your breasts are like two fawns that browse among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh, into the hill of incense. Now, this is poetic imagery to describe his partner's body as an amazing garden and mountain full of intoxicating perfume. So, when we read the Bible, sex is a blessing from God. The idea that sex itself is bad or dirty or shameful or satanic is not a Christian idea. Sex is something to be celebrated and received with worship. Genesis 2 says Adam and his wife were naked and they felt no shame. So we need to fight the popular idea that Christians are against sex or think that sex itself is bad. Christians are pro-body and pro-sex because we believe God created them. And he gave them to us as gifts to enjoy and to steward. So I want you to give your neighbor a high five. That body is good and has been created by God as something sacred to be celebrated and cherished. Here's my third point. So my first point was we need to talk about sex. My second point was a question, is sex good or bad? And if we follow the Bible, the answer is sex is a gift from God. It's something good. Here's my third point. What is bad sex? And I want to say, like anything good, sex can be distorted or misused. Fire is good, but when it is misused, it burns and destroys. If the fire from that oven got out of the oven, we'd be in trouble here. Sex is good, but when it is misused, it can become destructive. And I want to say that selfish sex is bad sex. Selfish sex is bad sex. Selfishness ruins good things and makes them destructive. Now, the Bible connects bad sex with greed and idolatry. There's a bunch of verses there. Bad sex violates boundaries and takes away from the other person. It's a form of consumerism, of treating a person not like a person, but like a thing, or an object, or like a piece of food that you want to dominate and enjoy. Christian faith makes an extremely important point, an extremely profound point. People aren't things. People are people. So when sex is selfish and treats others like things, then sex has become dangerous and destructive. A woman named Milu wrote a story on MeTooEthiopia.com about how her piano teacher sexually abused her when she was a little girl. She powerfully described how this sexual experience made her feel confused, worthless, and tempted to use sex as a weapon later in her life. This sex was not a good gift. It was a selfish act of violence. The teacher was forcing himself on a child to satisfy a twisted desire. And this is the danger of bad sex. What can I get? How can I feel what I want to feel? How can I use that person to satisfy myself? This is what I find sad and sick about a lot of love music today. It's all about how I can get what I want and use the other person to get it. It's dehumanizing. But even consensual sex between adults can still be selfish. Two people can agree to use one another for their own lust. And here sex is reduced to a transaction of physical pleasure. I think pornography is a key example of selfish sexuality. One person wants money or attention or power. The other person wants pleasure or power or something else. So they use each other to get what they want. One person gets maybe some money, usually a very small amount of money. And the other person gets an orgasm, usually in a lonely place with increasing dissatisfaction. Sex becomes a dehumanized transaction. I use you like a piece of meat to get what I want. And you use me like a piece of meat to get what you want. We don't know each other, or care about each other, or have a commitment to one another. And sex becomes just another desperate attempt to feel myself. to satisfy myself, to assert myself. And so sex becomes increasingly lonely and increasingly empty. So sex is a good gift from God, but sex needs to fulfill its purpose in order to be good. Otherwise, it can become an addiction and a weapon that destroys others and destroys ourselves. And I'm suggesting that that destruction is driven by selfishness. How can I use another person to get what I want? Here's my fourth point. I'm not going to talk for long. What is good sex? So I said sex is good, but it can be twisted and become bad. So what is good sex? And this is a topic that we could talk about for 10 hours, or like for the rest of the century. But let me give this very simple idea. It has 3 parts. Good sex is a physical act of communication that makes covenant love across an entire life. Good sex is a physical act of communication that makes covenant love across an entire life. Now, you might think good sex is married sex. And I agree, but I don't think that's enough. 2 people can be married and still have bad sex. Again, they might just selfishly use each other to get what they want. Or one of the people, usually the husband, might abuse the other to get what he wants. It's so sad. I've heard so many cases in the last 2 months of husbands sexually abusing their wives. So is all good sex, is all married sex good sex? That's too simple. That's way too simple. It's very dangerous to assume that all married sex is good sex. So what is good sex? I said it already. I think good sex is a physical act of communication that makes covenant love across an entire life. We know that our most basic purpose for being alive is to love God completely and to love our neighbor as ourselves. So sex needs to fit into this larger calling to live a life of love. Let me break this down just real quick, these three pieces. First, good sex is a physical act. As I said, the Bible affirms that our bodies are created by God and that physical pleasure is God's gift. So physical pleasure is not shameful or dirty. It's the gift and blessing of God. So sex is a physical act. It's something that we do with our bodies. Second, good sex is a physical act of communication. I'm really passionate about this point. Animals have physical pleasure, but they don't communicate. Animals obviously can have sex, but they're not communicating when they're having sex. Good sex doesn't just feel, because feeling is easily all about me. Good sex communicates. And this is what I think good sex communicates, friends. I love you. I'm with you. I'm for you. I want you to be fully alive. You can trust your vulnerability and intimacy with me. I will not take what I want and go. I will not use you and disappear. I want you to be known in your depths. I will remain committed to you no matter what fear or pain or sorrow or darkness I find. Your body is good. You are good. Through joy and pain, through health and sickness, through success and failure, through hope and frustration, we are one. So, that's what I think good sex is communicating. Third, good sex is a physical act of communication that makes covenant love across an entire life. Christians believe that we can only truly communicate these things and mean them within a covenant that lasts an entire life. How do I know that my sex isn't selfish? How do I know that my love isn't lust? I need to be willing to make a covenant commitment of unconditional love to the other person. I need to commit myself across struggle, sickness, when money is low, when life is hard, and when we need to forgive one another. That's the context in which good sex is happening. Now, this is the sad thing about Hollywood sex and porn sex. It's disconnected from physical sickness, from mental illness, from financial stress, from searching for life's meaning and living for others. Sex is disconnected from making love. Christians believe that sex is something sacred, and it can't be disconnected from the entirety of life and our calling to love one another. When we have sex, we become one, and this communication of life needs to unfold within unconditional love. This is something maybe we can come back to in the questions, but in the movies, sex is so disconnected from like cleaning the house, or being sick and nasty, or being like depressed and super discouraged with your life, or asking questions about God and wrestling with your faith. Christians think that that's the right context for good sex. That commitment through every context and season of life where you say, I am with you, and I'm for you, and I'm not going to run away when it gets hard. When you've done that, then you're ready for good sex, sex that's meaningful. Now notice that language I used of covenant. Consent or contract is about what I can get. How can I be fulfilled? What can I get for myself? And once I'm satisfied, the transaction is finished. Covenant is about personal devotion to the other person and our shared life. What can I give to you? How can I be there for you? How can we fulfill each other? This is why we believe sex is meant for the lifelong covenant of marriage. Having sex outside of marriage is like signing checks you can't cash. You're saying, here's $1 million, but you've got or a million bir, or a billion bir, or a trillion bir, but you've got 100 bir in the bank. Sex is a promise of union, commitment to lifelong communication. Now, the Bible has a mystical vision of sex, just like Christ united himself with humanity and his people, so the husband and wife unite with one another. Jesus said this in the Gospels, that the husband and the wife become one flesh. They become a kind of new mystical body. And I love this, friends. The Christian faith is radical and countercultural. It says that your body has a kind of divine significance. Your body has a holy, sacred, heavenly importance. And when two people bring that together, something holy is happening. So let me sum up. Sex is a physical act. We're enjoying our bodies, or at least sometimes. It's an act of communication. We're meaningfully talking to one another about being for and with one another. And it's a covenant of love across an entire life. We're serving the well-being of the other person in good and bad, in joy and sorrow, in wealth and poverty, in passion and discouragement. We don't give up when it gets difficult. Now, even from a scientific point of view, when we have sex, chemicals are released in our brains that are trying to establish a lasting connection with other people. This is really interesting. If you go into the neuroscience of sexuality, we find that your brain is releasing chemicals that are trying to connect you with that person. So even our bodies are telling us that sex is not something we're meant to just do and move on. like we see in nature. It's a form of passionate communication intended for a covenant life. Here's my last point, friends, or my last question. How can single people get ready for good sex? How can single people get ready for good sex? And I have just a few humble suggestions. A lot of Christians think that the only sexuality for single people is no sex. I grew up hearing true love waits. I'm guessing you did too. Now, that's only half of the story. Our calling isn't just to avoid bad sex. Our calling is to get ready for good sex. So how do we do that? First, I encourage you to start reimagining sex. Reimagine sex. How do you think about sex? Good sex isn't about me getting what I want. Good sex is about mutual pleasure that communicates and makes a covenant of love with one other person. Is that what you're fantasizing about? Is that what you're dreaming about and hoping for? To say, I'm going to be with you and for you, no matter how good or how bad it gets. Reimagine sex. Now, this is a major problem for single Christians. We secretly think that sex is all about us. And so we have this fantasy that when we get married, all of our desires will be magically fulfilled. But what we want is selfish sex, not good sex. We just think, well, now that I'm married, I can enjoy my selfish sex. But the married people in the room know that that's not how it works, and that it doesn't turn out well. Good sex is always with a covenant partner who has needs and desires and wounds. So I want to encourage you, how do you think about sex? For you, what is good sex? Is it just passion and sweat and something you've seen in the movie? Or is there something more to it that you're dreaming about and getting ready to? You need to ask yourself this question. Second, be careful who's teaching you about sex. Who are your sex teachers? If you're letting movies or music videos or porn teach you about sex, you're going to be badly confused and misled. Now, Lily and I love the TV show Friends. Does anybody watch Friends? I think probably all of you do, or almost all. We like Friends, but that show is obsessed with sex. And I've noticed that almost every episode assumes that if you're not having sex, you're a loser. Just go back to Friends and watch a couple episodes and watch how often sex comes up and what it assumes about sex. I want to encourage you to think about, who are my sex teachers? Where am I getting the sources of my ideas about what sex is for and what makes sex good and what makes sex bad? Maybe after tonight you could go home and make a list and ask yourself, are these good teachers? Are these the people that I want telling me about something important in my life? Third, talk about sex with married people you respect. Talk about sex with married people you respect. Ask them your questions. Tell them your temptations and experiences and anxieties. Married people invite single people to talk openly about sex. It doesn't need to be embarrassing or taboo. And I want to just volunteer right now. If you're looking for somebody to talk about sex with, here I am. I'm willing to talk with you. You can find me on Facebook, or you can get my number from Tigist or from one of the other organizers of the event. I've had chats with some of you about sex already. We should talk about something that's important in our lives, and we should talk about it with people that we respect. Fourth, remember that sex isn't everything. Remember that sex isn't everything. I know that sometimes your body is like raging because you have lots of chemicals in your brain that are like pumping into you saying sex is everything and I need it now. Have you ever felt that way? Raise your hand. Sex is everything, and I need it now. But the teaching of the Bible is that sex isn't everything. Jesus never had sex. There are many other men and women in the Bible that don't seem to have ever had sex. Sex is a good gift from God that we should celebrate in marriage, but sex isn't the purpose of life. We need to be mature people who can enjoy sex but not worship it. And I think that these are the two dangers that we face today in culture. Sex is bad, and we get that a lot from the church. And then sex is everything. We get that a lot from our music and our movies and from some of our friends. We need to avoid both of those. Sex isn't everything and sex isn't bad. So remember that, friends. Don't worship it. It's a terrible master. It's a good gift, but a bad master. And here's my final suggestion. Fifth, embrace that God loves you unconditionally. Embrace that God loves you unconditionally, even if sex is a place of pain or regret or shame or fear in your life. Paul declares that nothing can separate us from the love of God. It's extraordinary, nothing. And I want to just take 1 second, and I want to invite you to have a little private moment with yourself. And think about a time where you felt embarrassed or ashamed or afraid or hurt, or maybe you hated yourself and you wanted to kill yourself. I want to say to you that God loved you in that moment, and that God will continue to love you and embrace you no matter what would seem to separate you from the love of God. Friends, we've been given the greatest calling to live as ambassadors of love in a world that has so much loneliness and so much lust. And so I want to encourage you, let's explore a Christian imagination and human flourishing together by practicing good sex that makes love in our world. Thanks so much.
Andrew, እናመሰግናለን።